Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a really pivotal conflict, one that reshaped North America, but is often, well, misunderstood.
Yeah.
The Mexican-American War, 1846 to 48.
That's right.
We've pulled together a lot of sources, covering the causes, the
Yeah.
fighting itself, and the really profound consequences.
Yeah.
Our mission here, for you, is to kind of distill the key takeaways, help you understand not just what happened, but why it still matters today.
Exactly. We want to go beyond the basic story, show how the U.S. got all this Western land, and importantly, the really tough questions that came with it.
Like slavery.
Like slavery, definitely. And also the fate of American Indians and the Mexicans already living in those areas. We'll really focus on how the war just completely changed their economic situation, their cultures. It's complex.
It really is. So to get started, we have to look at Texas, right? It's independence and then the U.S. annexation.
Yeah.
How did that specific issue become the spark for this much bigger war?
It's absolutely crucial because Texas declared independence from Mexico back in 1836. But Mexico, they never really accepted it. They saw Texas as, a province that was just rebelling.
Okay.
So for nearly 10 years, U.S. presidents like Jackson, Van Buren, they hesitated. They held back from annexing Texas.
Why? Fear of war?
Pretty much. They understood Mexico would see it as, well, an act of aggression, a direct path to conflict.
But then things changed. James K. Polk gets elected in 1844, and his whole campaign was basically annex Texas.
Exactly. Polk's election was a massive signal. It showed there was popular support for expansion, this idea of manifest destiny.
So the public was behind it.
Yeah, and Polk's predecessor, John Tyler, he saw the writing on the wall. He actually pushed through the annexation right before he left office.
Okay, so Tyler finalized it knowing Polk was coming in.
Right, and that act, while cheered in the U.S., was just a major insult to Mexico. It really ramped up the tension.
And Polk, he wasn't just interested in Texas, was he? Yeah. He had his eyes on more territory.
Oh, definitely. His ambitions went way further west, California, New Mexico.
So after annexation, he sends John Slidell, a diplomat, down to Mexico City. What was Slidell trying to achieve? It seems pretty bold.
It was incredibly bold. Slidell had two main goals, both pretty audacious. First, Polk told him to try and buy the New Mexico and California territories.
Just straight up offer to buy them.
Yep. And Mexican authorities were understandably completely unwilling. They saw it as a blatant land grab.
I can imagine. What was the second goal?
To sort out the border dispute with Texas, this was key. The U.S. was now claiming the Rio Grande River as the southern border.
But Mexico disagreed.
Strongly. Mexico maintained the border was the Nueces River, much further north. We're talking about a huge chunk of land difference there.
Wow. So Mexico wouldn't sell California and New Mexico, and they wouldn't budge on the Nueces River border.
Exactly. They were still furious about Texas leaving in the first place. They weren't about to give up more land or concede the border. Slidell hit a brick wall.
Okay, so diplomacy fails. Polk wants this land. Mexico won't cooperate. What's his next move? It sounds like he needed a reason to go to war.
That's pretty much it. Since he couldn't get what he wanted peacefully, Polk deliberately provoked a conflict.
How?
In early 1846, he orders General Zachary Taylor to take American troops right down to the Rio Grande.
Into that very land Mexico still claimed.
Precisely. Land the U.S. said was theirs post-annexation, but Mexico saw as disputed as theirs.
And then?
Well, Mexican troops eventually encountered Taylor's forces. A skirmish broke out. 11 American soldiers were killed.
And Polk seized on that.
Immediately, he went to Congress and famously declared that Mexicans were killing Americans on American soil, never mind that the soil was highly disputed.
So that was the justification he needed.
It was a pretext, yes. Congress, caught up in the expansionist feeling, declared war on May 13th, 1846. It was, a calculated move by Polk to force the issue.
And the war itself led to, well, huge changes on the map. The U.S. victory meant vast new territories. What exactly did the U.S. gain?
The biggest immediate outcome was the Mexican cession. This was all formalized in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848.
Right, the treaty that ended the war.
Yes. It did two main things. Established the Rio Grande as the official southern border of Texas, finally settling that dispute in the U.S.'s favor.
Okay.
And crucially, it forced Mexico to cede California and New Mexico, which included present-day California, Nevada, Utah, most of Arizona and New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming to the United States.
For a price, though.
Yes, the U.S. paid Mexico $15 million for it. Seems small now, but it was significant then. And then a few years later, in 1853, there was the Gadsden Purchase, adding another piece of what's now Arizona and New Mexico.
So if you put it all together,
Mexico lost more than half of its territory from before the war. It fundamentally redrew the map of North America. You essentially get the continental U.S. we know today.
an enormous shift.
Yeah.
And acquiring all that land immediately threw the issue of slavery back into the spotlight, didn't it? Made everything much more intense.
Oh, absolutely. It poured gasoline on the fire. You had figures like Frederick Douglass, the incredibly powerful voice, an escaped slave, a leading abolitionist. He immediately called out the war.
What was his argument?
He saw it very clearly, not as some patriotic quest, but as a calculated plot to expand slavery into new territories.
So not just about land, but about extending the reach of slave states.
Exactly. Douglass argued that every U.S. victory would just strengthen what he called the slave power, the political and economic clout of the slaveholding states and the federal government. It's a really critical perspective.
And that tension showed up in Congress almost immediately with the Wilmot Proviso. What was that about?
Right, the Wilmot Proviso. Congressman David Wilmot proposed this amendment in 1846, right as the war was starting.
And it proposed what?
It proposed banning slavery in any territory acquired from Mexico, any of it. A direct challenge to Southern interests.
Did it pass?
No, it was voted down repeatedly. The Senate, where Southern power was stronger, always blocked it, but its importance is huge.
How so, if it failed?
Because it forced the issue out into the open. For the first time, Congress had to directly debate whether slavery could expand west. Many historians see it as like the first real battle in the political conflict that eventually blew up into the Civil War.
Interesting. And you mentioned support for it wasn't always purely about morality.
That's right. Many supporters backed it for free soil reasons. They wanted the western lands kept free for white homesteaders, farmers, without having to compete with the plantation system based on enslaved labor. So, often more of an economic argument than a purely abolitionist one.
So political debates were raging, but there was also moral opposition outside of Congress, right? People objecting on principle.
Definitely. And the most famous example is probably Henry David Thoreau.
The writer from Walden Pond.
That's him. A key transcendentalist thinker. He believed deeply in individual conscience over government demands.
And he opposed the war.
Vehemently. He saw it as fundamentally unjust, a land grab purely to expand slavery. And he acted on his belief. He refused to pay a poll tax in Massachusetts, arguing that the money supported the war effort, and he actually got arrested and spent a night in jail for it.
Wow. And that experience led to?
It directly inspired his famous essay, Civil Disobedience, published in 1849.
Ah, okay.
In it, he argues that individuals have a moral duty to resist unjust government actions. Don't just go along with it. That idea was incredibly influential for abolitionists then, but also much later for people like Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr. around the world. A powerful legacy from that one act of defiance.
That's fascinating. So the war changes the map, ignites these huge debates. But what about the people already living on that land? How did this massive transfer of territory affect indigenous peoples and Mexican Americans?
This is where the human cost really becomes stark. For both groups, it was devastating. It completely upended their lives, their ability to support themselves, their cultures, everything changed.
Let's talk about Mexican Americans first. You mentioned the Californios earlier, the Spanish-speaking residents of California. What happened to them after 1848?
Well, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo technically granted them U.S. citizenship.
Okay, so they were citizens.
Yes, but that citizenship often meant very little in practice. They ran into legal systems stacked against them, Anglo-squatters just taking their land, and the huge expense of trying to prove ownership of their ancestral land grants in American courts.
So they lost their land.
Many did. Huge amounts of land. It was a process that systematically pushed the established Mexican elite, the Californios, out of economic and social power as the U.S. took over.
Is there a specific person who exemplifies this?
Mariano Vallejo is a really tragic example. He was a major figure, a California military commander, a huge landowner.
And he initially supported the U.S.
He actually welcomed annexation at first. He thought it would bring order, progress. But instead, despite his status, he saw his own political influence evaporate and his vast properties shipped away by legal challenges and incoming settlers. His story really mirrors the broader decline of that California elite.
A stark turnaround. And did everyone just accept this, or was there resistance?
Oh, there was definitely resistance. Juan Cortina is a key figure here.
Tell us about him.
Cortina led what's sometimes called the Cortina War around 1859 to 1861 down in South Texas. He basically led armed bands against Anglo settlers and the Texas Rangers.
Why? What was his stated goal?
He claimed he was defending Mexican Americans Tejanos from having their land stolen, from violence, from just blatant racial discrimination. His actions really highlight how tense and violent things got along the border after the war.
So even with treaty-guaranteed citizenship?
Even with citizenship, Mexican Americans faced serious attacks on their civil rights. Things like being prevented from voting, segregated schools, ongoing violence. It was a really difficult period.
Okay, so that's the Mexican-American experience.
Yeah.
How did things differ for the indigenous peoples living in these newly acquired territories? Was their situation even worse?
In many ways, yes. And there's one absolutely critical difference.
What's that?
Unlike Mexicans in the territory, indigenous peoples were offered no path to U.S. citizenship at all by the treaty. None.
Really? Not even the possibility?
Not then. Widespread Native American citizenship wouldn't really happen until well into the 20th century, like the 1930s. So their experience was marked by even more direct, violent conflict, forced displacement, and a systematic destruction of their power.
Can you give an example? Maybe a group like the Comanche. They controlled a huge area, didn't they?
Yes, the Comancheria. The Comanche were incredibly powerful on the Southern Plains. Their whole society, their power, was built around controlling vast territories, trade networks, and especially the bison herds.
And U.S. expansion disrupted that.
Completely. Settlers moving west, the U.S. military campaigns, they disrupted the bison migration patterns, undermined the trade systems. It was a direct assault on the foundations of Comanche life and power. By the late 1800s, military pressure and disease had essentially broken their dominance, shattering their economic independence.
So that's devastating. And there were specific acts of extreme violence, too, like the Sand Creek Massacre.
Sand Creek is just a horrific example. It happened in 1864 in Colorado Territory.
What exactly occurred?
A Cheyenne and Arapaho village, led by Chief Black Kettle, was actually camped under what they thought was U.S. protection. They'd sought peace. But a Colorado militia unit attacked the village without provocation.
Attacked a peaceful village.
Yes. And they killed over 150 people, mostly women and children. It was an absolute atrocity, a brutal demonstration of the violence inherent in expansion, and it, understandably, fueled even more resistance among Plains tribes.
It's hard to even comprehend. This deep dive has really shown how complex and, frankly, tragic this period was, far beyond just lines on a map. So, bringing it all together, what's the main takeaway? What's the overarching significance of the Mexican-American War for how we understand American history?
Well, zooming out, it's clear the war was so much more than just acquiring territory, wasn't it?
Definitely.
It was this absolutely pivotal moment. It dramatically accelerated the national arguments, especially over slavery, really deepening those cracks that led straight to the Civil War just over a decade later. It also forced Americans to grapple with really profound moral questions about expansion, about justice, about what the nation stood for. Questions we still debate, you know?
True.
And perhaps most importantly, it irrevocably changed the lives, the rights, the futures of millions of people, the Mexicans and indigenous peoples already there, and the settlers who came after. It laid down tracks for future conflicts, for civil rights movements, and for these ongoing arguments about borders, identity, and rights in North America.
A really complex legacy that continues to unfold. Thank you so much for walking us through that. It gives us a lot to think about.
My pleasure.
And for you listening, here's something to ponder as we wrap up. How do the echoes of these 19th century land acquisitions and all those struggles over land, who belongs, civil rights, how do they continue to shape our conversations about borders, belonging, and justice right here, right now, in North America today? Something to think about. Until next time, keep digging deeper.